Tom Holland is a fantastic actor. He nails the very basic traits of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, in addition to being very entertaining, both in his own performance and his own films. But that's about as much praise as I can give his rendition of the Wallcrawler. There are a plethora of issues that I have with MCU Spider-Man that are small nitpicks in some regards and core fundamentals in others. Before we begin, however, I just want to say, like MCU Spider-Man as much as you want. You are free to enjoy whatever you like and no one can stop you. But when I am discussing objective issues, your feelings are no longer relevant. Let's begin in no particular order with his suits. The Spider-Man costume is one of the most iconic superhero suits of all time, and despite having dozens of varied suits and many different people to wear them, each individual costume at least felt unique and iconic to the respective user. This is something I feel the recent adaptations mostly achieved. In the Tobey Maguire trilogy, Peter has a grand total of 4 costumes across 3 films. The cheap and tacky wrestling suit in Spider-Man 1, which is swiftly replaced with the first version of the web suit which Peter wears for the rest of the film. Following multiple battles with the Green Goblin, the heavily damaged web suit is either repaired or replaced into the new version used in Spider-Man 2. With this costume being repaired with slight graphical tweaks going into Spider-Man 3 and later into No Way Home. The final suit that Peter 2 gets being the iconic symbiote suit, which is obviously temporary, however it is a temporary costume for many adaptations of Spider-Man, since unlike most suits, it is an alien organism that eventually leads to the creation of Venom, one of Spider-Man's iconic rogue members. Every single suit in the trilogy, as a result, feels iconic and likable. They are only ever replaced when absolutely necessary. In the Amazing Spider-Man films, Peter 3 has a grand total of 2 suits. Technically 3 if you think a beanie, balaclava and sunglasses makes a Spider-Man suit, but I digress. The other 2 suits are unique to their respective movies. The TASM 1 suit has a cheap, homemade feel, which is certainly controversial in terms of quality. However, it perfectly suits the tone of the movie, being a more grounded take on Spider-Man. The sequel would then replace this suit with a far more iconic, comic-accurate look for a Spider-Man suit, which makes a lot of sense since multiple years have taken place between the 2 films, and as a result an upgrade was overdue. In the Insomniac games, canonically Peter wears 6 or 7 different suits, however they never once felt like they were replacing the previous ones as they were usually circumstantial or engineered to counter a specific threat. The classic suit needed to be upgraded into the advanced suit since it was battle damaged and outdated. The advanced suit was not enough to stop Doc Ock, so Peter crafted the anti-Ock suit to help even the odds. 2 years passed between Spider-Man 1 and 2, so Peter would logically further enhance the advanced suit, giving it visual enhancements in addition to the spider arms and web wings to create a new suit, which acts as an upgrade over the original. The symbiote bonds to Peter, saving his life and granting him the black suit, which is then changed into the symbiote costume after coming into contact with the meteor, with this costume being lost when Miles helps Peter overcome the influences of the alien. The final costume being the anti-Venom suit, which not only represents Peter being cured of the symbiote's influence completely, however it is also necessary to combat Venom and the symbiote invasion across New York. So what does all of this have to do with MCU Peter? Well, the main issue is that he has far too many Spider-Man suits for any of them to truly stand out. However, it isn't all too bad to start off with. In Civil War, Peter has 2 suits, although one is only shown in recordings, which is fine. In Homecoming, this is exactly the same, however the Iron Spider suit is teased at the end of the film. In Avengers Infinity War, Peter wears 2 suits, with the new Iron Spider being the only suit featured in Endgame. Nothing completely out of the ordinary so far, however this is where things get absolutely ridiculous. In Spider-Man Far From Home, Peter goes from the Iron Spider to the stealth suit to the upgraded suit, not even including the Stark suit he wears once or twice, nor the homemade suit which cameos in the Mysterio illusions. That's 5 fucking suits in one film. But wait, we aren't done yet, as it gets even worse in No Way Home. In this film, Peter goes from the upgraded suit back to the Iron Spider suit to the magic suit back to the upgraded suit, which is then upgraded into the integrated suit, which is finally retired at the end of the film with the Parker costume. Another 5 suits for Peter to wear, with Peter switching costumes on average every 30 fucking minutes. Now, don't get me wrong, I really love a few of the MCU Spider-Man suits, and a couple of them are amongst my favourite superhero suits of all time. However, the MCU treats these costumes as being completely replaceable and insignificant. Peter even develops a pseudo-friendship with the Karen AI in Homecoming, yet this is mysteriously forgotten in subsequent films. Even when he develops his own costume using Stark tech, it doesn't even cross his mind to try implement the AI into the new suit. It doesn't matter whether you like or hate the costumes, as chances are they are either replaced by the end of the movie or are forced to compete with other suits for the limelight. Now this would make total sense for a character like Iron Man, where his suits are his main source of power, and as a result he needs to create more advanced armors over time to combat new threats. But with someone like Spider-Man, his main source of power came from the spider bite. He doesn't need 1,000,001 costumes when a couple are more than sufficient. Now to give credit where credit is due, the earlier films for the most part do give good reasoning for Peter to wear different suits. In Civil War, casual clothing isn't going to protect him from actual superhumans, and as a result he is granted a more advanced suit, which he then loses in Homecoming as a result of his own actions. In Infinity War and Endgame, the Avengers are fighting otherworldly threats that threaten the entire universe, and as a result Peter wearing protective armor makes narrative sense. It's really Far From Home where things fall apart, as previously mentioned. Nick Fury grants Peter the stealth suit even though he already had the Stark suit. Even with the excuse of keeping his identity a secret, it still doesn't make sense. This is the same world with superhumans, sorcerers, aliens, and tech beyond our understanding. Not to mention the world is still in the process of recovering from the snap and the blip, an event where trillions of people seemingly died all at once, with the blip bringing everyone back, forcing those who died into a world that from their perspective is 5 years into the future. Spider-Man randomly showing up in Europe would be easily explainable and the least of everyone's worries, assuming that people would even notice at all. But nope, new suit, 'cause why not? And as previously stated, it's even worse in No Way Home. Peter ditches the upgraded suit randomly for the Iron Spider, even though his identity is public now anyways, so wearing nanotech under his clothes seems redundant unless it was his standard go-to suit, which is far from the case. The magic add-ons that Doctor Strange gives Peter are used for a few scenes and then never again. The Iron Spider suit has now been forgotten and changed back to the upgraded suit, which Doc Ock then somehow combines with the nanoparticles he took from the Iron Spider to create the integrated suit. Cause why not? It's been more than 5 minutes without a new fucking costume for this sticky twat. And then at the end of the film, Peter regresses back to a cloth suit for comic accuracy, I suppose. All I'm left wondering is why Peter couldn't just use one of the fabricators, since the world has forgotten Peter and not Spider-Man. Overall, whilst other Spider-Men have had a couple of suits that grew into iconic costumes, MCU Peter has had over 8 different suits that all felt redundant and replaceable with every movie. And while some of them were legitimately good, the end result is that they felt less special. Peter Parker is nothing if not responsible. You can usually count on him to make the morally correct decision even if it costs him dearly. However, just like any other human, Peter isn't perfect and will make the wrong decision occasionally and pay the price. I mean, it's literally how Uncle Ben died in almost every Spider-Man adaptation. It's pretty obvious that Peter Parker in the MCU goes by the line, "with great power comes great responsibility," or one similar to it anyways, as shown in Civil War. Therefore, my question would be why this Peter makes such baffling decisions in subsequent films. Now obviously, meeting your mentor that you have idolized for years would have a huge effect on a 15-year-old and potentially make you want to live up to them. However, the way it is portrayed is very inaccurate to the character of Spider-Man and only serves to discredit Uncle Ben, whilst putting Tony Stark on a pedestal. Peter in Homecoming puts on the Spider-Man suit and has a legitimately great montage of him doing everyday tasks and helping civilians with minor issues, and being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But then he reports all of his actions back to Happy Hogan as if he's a student handing in a fucking school report. Like, mate, you've been Spider-Man canonically for around 6 months, presumably living by a version of Uncle Ben's iconic line, yet you switch from a responsible hero to a clown who simps for Iron Man, and bases his superhero journey around Stark after meeting him 6 months into your career. This being at its absolute worst in Homecoming when he loses the Stark suit. This on its own is a great moment and serves as a reality check for Peter, that he is in over his head, and if Iron Man hadn't been there it would have resulted in civilian casualties and it would have been Peter's fault. What isn't great, however, is that he quits being Spider-Man because of this. Like, yeah, I understand he would feel shit after disappointing Iron Man of all people, however, giving up all responsibility is ludicrous and is a spit in the face to not just Uncle Ben, but also Peter Parker as a character. It's so abrupt of a change that I'm honestly left questioning if Peter would have actually gone after Vulture if he wasn't revealed to be Liz Allen's father, or whether he would have actually bounced back and donned the red and blues ever again. With this being even worse in Far From Home, where he tries on multiple occasions to give up being Spider-Man to enjoy his field trip with MJ and Ned, and he needs Aunt May and Nick Fury to effectively drag him back to the superhero life because he is unwilling to do so on his own. However, his biggest fuck-up in this film was when he gave the Edith glasses to Mysterio. Like, seriously, what the fuck was that? Peter Parker has idolized Iron Man for years and even had the pleasure of fighting alongside him to save the universe. Stark's death clearly affects Peter deeply in Far From Home, demonstrating how much Stark meant to him. Aside from the 2 Spider-Man suits that Iron Man made for him, the glasses are the only things Peter now has to remember Tony, and as a result, he 100% would not give them away. Even if he wasn't ready to accept the responsibility, hiding the glasses or giving them to Doctor Strange or Happy Hogan would be the best course of action. I mean, fuck, Happy Hogan kept Iron Man's wedding ring safe for nearly 10 years. I'm certain a pair of glasses would be child's play to him. Peter thinks the best course of action is to give the only thing Iron Man left to him in his will to a man he has known for a few days at most. This is ridiculously out of character for this Peter. I mean, fuck, you may as well have given Beck the Iron Spider suit as well whilst you were at it. This trend continuing in No Way Home. Peter's identity being exposed isn't his fault, however the idea that he doesn't even try to solve the issue himself and instead opts to go to Doctor Strange is blatant stupidity. This same Peter would rather go to Doctor Strange and turn back time to prevent Mysterio from revealing his identity than going to the MIT administrators and pleading his own case. Something which I'm glad Doctor Strange calls him out on at least. Like, if he had exhausted all other options and then gone to Strange, it would have made complete sense, but nope. This version of Pete seems to do anything to run from his problems rather than to confront them. Peter also disregards helping the villains from alternate Earths, with Aunt May needing to convince him that it's his responsibility to help, cause why not? The biggest piss take, however, is the scene between the 3 Peters where they meet for the first time, but first we need some context. One of the most admirable aspects about the other live-action Spider-Man is that they only quit being Spider-Man under very specific circumstances. Tobey Maguire quits being Spider-Man when all aspects of his life has gone to shit. He struggles to afford rent, his crush rejects him and accepts John's proposal in front of his face. His best friend holds resentment towards Spider-Man and Peter to an extent. His mentor figure turns into a supervillain, he's struggling to support his aunt. He gets fired from his pizza delivery job, he's failing at school, meaning that the only way he can earn money is to give photos to the Bugle, which Jameson then uses to slander his reputation as Spider-Man. And even when he does quit, it's only a good decision in the short term, as whilst yes, it was a positive decision for Peter, it was a terrible decision for the population of New York. Andrew's Spider-Man quits for several months, possibly a whole year, after losing the love of his life, and it's even revealed in No Way Home that even after he returned, it wasn't as if he was mentally in a good place. He got rageful, he got bitter, he stopped pulling his punches. The scene where Pete meets his alternate selves should have been perfect, and ignoring context, it is perfect. Iron Man is dead, Peter just watched Aunt May die in his arms, Happy Hogan is captured by the FBI, the villains are on the loose, and Peter is all alone. Even when the other Peters show up, there is no shitty MCU humor, no music, it's a heartfelt moment between them that feels heavy. If MCU Pete was ever going to quit being Spider-Man, it would be in this moment, yet he quits being Spider-Man in all 3 of his solo films, which ultimately detracts from this scene. Imagine if MCU Peter was like Insomniac Miles, where Peter willingly prioritizes being Spider-Man above all else, to such an extent that he will sacrifice spending time with his friends to make a difference as Spider-Man. This scene would have hit so much harder. However, in its current state, this damn near perfect scene is ruined and is just the latest in a fairly long line of instances of MCU Peter wanting to quit being Spider-Man, only to be dragged back into the whole superhero thing in the next damn scene. Jesus Christ. Thankfully, Peter in this film finally accepts responsibility by correcting his own error, ultimately saving the world, potentially the universe, at the cost of everyone forgetting Peter Parker exists. This was a hard-hitting moment for his character, and we can only hope this results in a permanent positive for the MCU's take on Spidey. I just wish we didn't need 6 fucking films for him to accept responsibility of all things. A hero is only as good as the villains they have to overcome. When written well, a villain can not only be just as appealing as the heroes, but in some cases, can outright steal the show. MCU Peter has gone up against a handful of villains, however for the sake of argument I'm just going to be looking at 2 villains specifically, the Vulture and Mysterio, and then I'll give a few thoughts on the No Way Home roster and how they were treated. Michael Keaton's Vulture was a fantastic Iron Man villain. His charm and charisma was balanced perfectly with his ruthless intelligence and equipment. He does morally incorrect and illegal activities, however it is for a good cause as he endeavours to create the perfect life for his wife and daughter. The problems, however, arise when trying to connect him to Spider-Man, since his entire motivation has nothing to do with Pete. He dislikes Tony Stark and the Avengers, and he reversed engineered Chitauri technology to create dangerous weaponry that he either sells or uses to complete heists. This is all well and fine, however we are given no context between him and Peter Parker until the 3rd act of the film, where it is revealed to Peter and indeed the audience that Toomes is Liz Allen's father, almost as if the writers forgot that this was a Spider-Man film and not an Iron Man one. Compare this to literally any of the villains in the Raimi trilogy or Doc Ock from the Insomniac games, where they have strong connections to Peter in one form or another, and this is almost the very first time that they are mentioned or set foot on screen. They are built up almost from the get-go, and as a result, when Peter eventually confronts said villains and saves the day, not only is it satisfying, however it creates strong emotional payoffs for Peter himself. Compare this to Homecoming, where there is no build-up at all. Peter just randomly fights Vulture in the suburbs and on the ferry, and yet he is nothing more than a random bad guy for Peter to stop. The final battle does show improvements, as Peter and Toomes are now aware of each other's identities and they have a few good moments together before they eventually fight. Yet even in this battle, Toomes views Peter as nothing but an obstacle in the way of his real objective, which is to perform a heist on the Quinjet carrying Avengers technology. Flip the coin, and Peter views Toomes as just a criminal to stop. He eventually captures Toomes and leaves him for Happy Hogan to discover, and then, well, Toomes is never mentioned again. Peter never acknowledges him for the rest of the MCU, almost as if he's been forgotten. Unfortunately, Mysterio is even worse. His motivation for becoming a villain once again stems from Tony Stark, however in this case, Beck hates Stark for naming his work Barf. Okay, sure, whatever. At the very least, Vulture had strong, almost noble motivation for why he was stealing Stark tech, but Quentin, on the other hand, is the equivalent of a child who was bullied at school and now wishes to seek revenge on the bully. The film needed Peter to be a complete cunt and to give Beck the glasses in order for his plan to actually work. Yet once again, Mysterio doesn't really care about Spider-Man. He genuinely believes that the train kills Pete, and he immediately forgets about him to prioritize his real objective, that being to create the illusion of an Avengers-level threat that he can stop. The one thing that Mysterio does that affects Pete is to reveal his identity and manipulate the drone's footage to discredit Spider-Man and tarnish his public reputation. However, once again, this comes out of nowhere and doesn't feel satisfying until the next film. If Beck had threatened to expose Peter's identity earlier in Far From Home, it could have created genuine conflict between him and Peter, and given him a genuine reason to go after him. Yet once again, the final battle devolves into Pete fighting a random criminal who has more ties to Iron Man than himself. And can I just say as well that this was fucking stupid? It's a good job that Iron Man did die in Endgame, as he would be able to prove Peter's innocence in a matter of seconds, not to mention that S.H.I.E.L.D. literally do nothing to defend Peter's reputation, despite going out of their way to hide his identity earlier in the film. Talk about convenient. Going into No Way Home, it doesn't get much better. Obviously, it's fantastic seeing these villains again, however they don't really connect with MCU Peter. Lizard is the equivalent of a participation award, Electro just does his whole power thing and only has emotional connections with Andrew's Spider-Man, and Sandman is not doing much of anything aside from wanting to go home and doing anything he can to achieve this. Doc Ock is simply a villain for MCU Peter to fight, as whilst Otto has great connections to Tobey's Spider-Man, Tom on the other hand has never seen this man in his life and he just comes out of nowhere to fight him. At least we got that genuinely great moment between Otto and Peter, however even this was overshadowed by the reunion between Tobey and Otto in the final battle. Thank God that Goblin was great at least. I can only hope in the future that Tom's Spider-Man gets genuinely fantastic villains that have strong connections to him and that creates good emotional conflict within the stories and indeed the MCU itself, but I just have no idea what to expect. A common occurrence for every good adaptation of Spider-Man is that they will face consequences for their actions. Even when Peter Parker makes the right choice as Spider-Man, he will usually suffer, and this helps make him an endearing character. Why would he choose to be Spider-Man when the cons outweigh the pros? Peter Parker in the MCU makes a plethora of mistakes, yet all consequences or repercussions are mitigated, undermined, or absent altogether. So let's start with Homecoming. Peter's fight at the bank resulted in the destruction of the sandwich shop in Queens, yet by some miracle no one dies or is injured in or outside of the shop. Peter also feels no remorse or guilt at potentially destroying this man's livelihood. He ditches Ned at Liz's party and he forgives him the next day. Everything is fine. Peter walks out of detention and is then sent to the principal's office and gets off scot-free. No punishment or anything. He unintentionally endangers the lives of his fellow students in the decathlon team, yet they all survive with no injuries. Everything's fine. He ditches Liz at Homecoming and everything is fine. None of the other students call Peter out for this. There is a small moment where Pete tries to make amends with Liz before she leaves, yet it doesn't amount to anything. She's promptly forgotten about and Pete moves on as if nothing happened. He doesn't even get a phone call from her when his identity is exposed. Everything is fine. Aunt May finds out he is Spider-Man, and despite earlier in the film expressing that Pete should turn the other way if he sees danger, by the events of Far From Home she is 100% supportive of her superhero son and nephew. Everything is fine. The only main consequence he faces in Homecoming is when he loses the suit after trying to do the right thing at the ferry, with him effectively earning the suit back by eventually beating Vulture and proving he is indeed a hero without the fancy suits. A legitimately good moment for MCU Peter. So, that's it, right? No. God no. Peter rejects the idea of being an Avenger, he gives up the prospect of being amongst the world's greatest heroes, and he gives up the idea of having a brand new Iron Spider suit. Yet in Infinity War, Peter is given the suit anyways, and is knighted an Avenger by Stark, with Pete seemingly proud. Undermining the entire arc he got in Homecoming, he might as well have chosen to be an Avenger anyways. The ship takes Stark, Peter, Strange, and the Guardians of the Galaxy billions of miles from Earth, yet Peter never shows any emotion at all. No excitement, curiosity, anxiety, fear, anger, sadness. He shows no emotional range whatsoever at this incredible event. Peter literally dies in the snap, comes back to life 5 years later, and doesn't act any differently. Almost as if nothing happened. Everything is fine. Speaking of the snap, let's discuss how it's handled in Far From Home. Despite multiple Avengers losing their lives in this titanic battle for the fate of the universe, in addition to the blip where billions of people reappear in a world 5 years into the future from their perspective, Far From Home treats this with a comedic tone. The important characters in Peter's class, including himself, were conveniently snapped away, meaning that everyone came back as if nothing happened, as if these two universe-altering events never took place. Everything is fine. Peter calls in a literal drone strike on his classmate by fucking accident, yet miraculously he distracts everyone instantly and deals with the thing without his identity being compromised. Everything is fine. After finding himself stranded in the Netherlands, injured and alone, Happy Hogan rescues him and somehow has a fabricator inside the Quinjet in perfect time for Peter to engineer a new suit. Everything is fine. Fortunately, No Way Home at least creates tangible consequences for Peter's actions. Mysterio exposes his identity and manipulates the footage to incriminate Peter, which tarnishes his reputation and indeed his own friend group. Going to Doctor Strange seems like the perfect plan on paper, yet it arguably creates more problems than it solves, as now supervillains from other worlds are entering the MCU as a result of Strange's failed spell. Peter tries to help cure the villains, however a consequence to this good gesture is that Aunt May would lose her own life trying to assist Pete. Finally, he suffers the biggest consequence of his life. As a heavy price to saving the world, he loses everyone and everything he loves, as everyone has now forgotten Peter Parker exists. Ned, MJ, Happy Hogan are all gone. He is alone with no loved ones or anything. My problem isn't that he never faces consequences, because in No Way Home this is far from the case. The problem that I have is that it takes nearly 5 whole films to establish major consequences for any of his actions that aren't easily undone. Compare this to the Raimi films or Insomniac Spider-Man, where almost every single action had consequences. It felt like Peter's actions truly mattered and affected the world around him for better or for worse. Although I guess I would need an entire category for something like that. Having a ridiculous amount of iconic, well-written superheroes all existing in one universe, routinely crossing over and teaming up, whilst also fighting their own individual battles is a fucking cool thing to exist. Especially at such a ridiculous quality that phases 1 to 3 provided. The MCU did a great job introducing characters like Iron Man, Thor, the Hulk, Captain America, Doctor Strange, and so many iconic heroes and villains from the comic books. However, when it came to Spider-Man's turn, well, it felt hollow? Let me explain. In Civil War, we get a couple of moments between Peter and Stark, and they serve as a moment to introduce Spider-Man. His words don't affect Stark at all, as he has already undergone his arc from the first 3 Iron Man films and the first 2 Avengers films. Peter shows up, fights alongside Iron Man at the airport battle, gets knocked down, and is then, well, forgotten about. Of all the characters in Civil War, Peter to me felt like an afterthought, like a character only added to tick boxes or to appease fans. Compare this to T'Challa or Black Panther, another character introduced in Civil War, yet he is given strong motivation for fighting against Bucky Barnes and Captain America, in addition to giving him the great moment between him and Zemo, showing his maturity as a fighter and as a leader. Spider-Man has almost no good motivation for being at the airport. He is dragged along for the ride against his will, and only fights to then be dropped when the plot needs him to be. Homecoming introduces a plethora of characters from Peter's class, and we finally have a Spider-Man standalone film. Yet in this film, the first half constantly ties Peter back to Iron Man and the Avengers, rather than letting him breathe and be his own hero, and his own man. In the second half, we do see an improvement, however I feel the final battle is incredibly difficult to take seriously. The idea of Vulture being able to hijack and perform a heist on Tony Stark's jet is fucking ludicrous when you factor in the insane tech at display. The jet has cloaking stealth tech and security systems, yet this feels basic and easy to exploit. Iron Man, even back in the first MCU film, shows a strong aversion to the idea that his tech can be used in the wrong hands, with this idea continuing in the sequel, especially when this plane contains Tony's new Hulkbuster, the prototype for Captain America's new shield, and Thor's magic belt. Stark certainly wouldn't leave anything to chance, especially when he doesn't even need to be in his modern Iron Man suits for them to be functional. Yet it's as though he's fallen asleep or removed from the plot in order for Vulture to be at all successful in this heist. In Infinity War, he has no effect on the plot at all. He is just another fighter and goes along for the ride. He takes a few hits from Thanos whilst getting in a few hits of his own, and he then dies in the snap. He is left on the sideline as the main conflict was between Stark and Strange. I feel like having an older, more mature Spider-Man would have worked perfectly here, bringing a more grounded, realistic, everyman perspective to this intense end-of-the-world situation, which could have created an interesting conflict between him, Iron Man, and Doctor Strange. However, instead, he is just a blind follower towards them both and is silenced to let the adults do the talking. The same can be said for Endgame. Peter comes back to life and immediately takes his place as just another fighter in this titanic battle. He is insignificant as the entire plot revolves around the OG Avengers and their arcs. Peter never gets the chance to shine. His few emotional moments with Tony Stark are good, however they feel overshadowed by the grander events of Endgame. Far From Home, despite being a solo Spider-Man film, still feels like an Iron Man film. Tony's death and the events of Endgame are mentioned constantly. Mysterio connects to Iron Man more than he ever could connect to Peter Parker. The arc in Homecoming, which actually made sense, is now repeated but done worse, with Peter finally accepting for the second time that he doesn't need to be the next Iron Man, but rather the first Spider-Man, whilst he creates his own Spider-Man suit using Tony Stark tech whilst AC/DC is blasting in the background. In No Way Home, not only does Peter rely on Doctor Strange for help rather than solving his own problems, however they do everything in their power to assassinate Strange and his character. This is the same man who unironically would sacrifice a child to save the universe in Infinity War, yet he is suddenly willing to tamper with the population of planet Earth and risk fucking over the entire universe to save a child, and this comes out of nowhere, even with Wong warning him against the idea. The sad thing about this is that this plan would have worked perfectly if Peter had simply asked for Strange to make everyone forget Mysterio. However, this couldn't have happened because that would be too intelligent for this version of Peter Parker. Not only does Peter somehow succeed at ruining Doctor Strange's spell, however later he fucking wins a battle against Doctor Strange of all people, in the mirror dimension no less. This is the same man who would run laps around Thor and Loki and banish them to Norway with a flick of his wrist when he wasn't even trying. And when he actually does want to fight, he can hold his own against Thanos with 4 Infinity Stones, yet somehow he sucks against Peter, with Pete then stealing his sling ring and leaving him stranded in the mirror dimension. Even when Strange separates Peter's astral form, he then magically forgets he has magic and tries reaching for the box just like an ordinary mortal man would do, just so that Peter has a chance. You can chalk this up to Peter having ridiculous plot armor or the film ruining Doctor Strange, but either way I find it harms Peter and the film overall, because it's clear the writers had a specific vision for No Way Home, and as a result they had to make up a load of bullshit in order for that vision to become reality, which no longer makes it feel believable as a result. Aunt May's death felt hollow as she never feels like a character. It's such a shame too, as Tom Holland is clearly acting his ass off and he does a phenomenal job representing how a child would react to losing the woman who raised him. And whilst yes, this is a fantastic emotional moment for Peter, unfortunately I was left frustrated, especially as to make her important or special, they effectively have to retcon the life advice Pete receives from not just Uncle Ben, but also Iron Man himself, just so that he can be loosely tied to the other 2 Spider-Men. The final issue with MCU Pete is the other 2 Spideys themselves. Seeing the superheroes I grew up with reprise their roles in the MCU was a dream come true. However, all it did was remind me of better times, because the emotional moments they have are well established and built up in their solo films. Tobey's reunion with Doc Ock felt touching and sincere. Spider-Man 2 gave us plenty of time between these great characters, making them have good chemistry, and this makes their reunion believable and that much more nostalgic. Andrew saving MJ was not only a good callback to when he failed to save Gwen Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, however it also offers him redemption and gives him a feeling of closure, since Gwen's death weighs heavily on him in TASM 2 and indeed No Way Home. MCU Peter is essentially overshadowed once again in his own solo films, and while some may chalk it up to being simply nostalgia, it's pretty clear it goes beyond that. The film tries ensuring that MCU Pete is Peter 1, yet all evidence would suggest he is Peter 3. He is the youngest and at the lowest in his life, and with him taking advice from his alternate selves who have been down a dark path in their own timelines, and they try ensuring that this doesn't happen with MCU Pete. Almost as if the film is trying to tell you that MCU Pete is the main one, rather than establishing it with legitimately great moments. So what does all of this mean? I am fully aware I have bombarded you with random shit over the last half an hour, but let's try draw a conclusion. MCU Spider-Man may or may not improve with his 4th solo film, assuming that it sees the light of day. However, I find it's ridiculous that this Spider-Man needs 6 whole films to achieve a level of character development that Spider-Man 1, TASM 1, and Spider-Man PS4 all achieved on their own. This version of the character doesn't intrigue me at all. He doesn't interest me. I'm not interested in his personal struggles because the films themselves don't take those struggles seriously for the most part. And even in serious moments, like Aunt May's death, they essentially have to be retconned or retcon other good moments rather than have them build upon the foundations that were laid in previous films. Tom Holland's Spider-Man's character arc is a series of waves. He will randomly choose to be the next Iron Man, only to be the next Spider-Man. But this arc will then be repeated in the next film, only for it to be completely dropped in No Way Home. It feels as though they have no idea where to take this character, and it really is a shame. Spider-Man is the most iconic character in the Marvel Universe, yet in the MCU it feels like he was an afterthought, and it was a total shame. Tom Holland is a great actor, and he brings his A-game to the role, but it feels as though they don't give him anything good to work with. And it's such a shame. And I would like to point out once again that I am not in any way saying that you have to hate MCU Spider-Man. He certainly has redeeming qualities, however for me at least, whilst 10% of his runtime is legitimately perfect, the other 90% is bogged down with issues that detract from his overall quality, turning him from a top-tier Spider-Man into honestly an average Spider-Man. Sorry, not sorry, that is just how I feel, and it's just how I responded to these films.